Ladies and gentlemen, how's everyone doing out there? Happy Saturday, happy Black and Cancer Week, and happy Immortalize Our Heroes Day on this last day of Black and Cancer. I want to welcome all of you to this panel. Is everyone enjoying Black and Cancer Week? I know I am. I know it's been wonderful learning about proliferating the pipeline to cancer disparities, to spreading the word, to avoiding self-destruction. First and foremost, we would like to thank our sponsors at Tiger Lily Foundation, the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, and Cancer Research UK for sponsoring us in order to put on this wonderful initiative. It's been beautiful to see a lot of people, of course, promote their work in being Black in cancer, but also showing love to one another. Now, if this is your first time attending a panel to Black and Cancer Week, first, welcome. It's wonderful to have you. Black in Cancer is a collective of current and in-training cancer investigators, doctors, cancer advocates, as well as those bringing awareness and policy to the forefront. We are dedicated to cancer education to the community, as well as mentorship in order to guide more of us into the pipeline. Now, today is a wonderful day and a significant day due to the fact that on this last day of Black in Cancer, we are focusing on the hallmark immortalization, and more specifically, immortalizing our heroes. For some of us, we know this in terms of cell immortalization. This leads to a cell having unlimited amounts of being able to, of course, replicate and leading to a point of being immortal. This topic is in the forefront when it comes to a significant person that is known as the mother of modern medicine. Today, this panel will be discussing that particular person, upholding the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks, mother, wife, sister, grandmother, wonderful Black woman, was being treated for cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital. After samples were taken from her without her permission, a discovery was made. Her cells were found to be immortal. And we would go on through the years since 1951 on to now, having multiple discoveries being found with the use of her cells, such as the polio vaccine, in terms of chemotherapeutics, and even now using it towards COVID-19 vaccine and other treatments. But we need to get to an understanding of the implications of the contributions she made in order for us to all go into the science world, but also in regards to, of course, understanding the implications on the community of what happened. And today we have three wonderful panelists that are going to be joining us in conversation, in discussion for this conversation in regards to upholding the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. I'm going to be introducing them, starting with Dr. Danita Brady. Dr. Danita Brady is the Presidential Assistant Professor of Cancer Biology at the University of Pennsylvania. She obtained her PhD in pharmacology in 2008 under the direction of Dr. Adrian Cox at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2008. Say hello, Dr. Brady.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you here today on this last day of Black and Cancer Week.
Absolutely. The next person I want to introduce is across the pond. Dr. Dean Fennell is the professor and consultant in theriatrics in medical oncology and the director of Leicester Mesothelioma Program at the University of Leicester, University Hospitals of Leicester's NIH Trust. Say hello, Dr. Fennell. Let's see if you can turn on your video.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hello there. Welcome. Hi from the UK. I think my camera's needs to be engaged. But here we go. Let's see.
Are you able to get on, or?
Let's have a look. Actually, I'm just waiting to be engaged. I think by yourself, or let's see. I think yeah, it's not allowing me to start the video, unfortunately. Let's see.
There we go. Try it now, Dr. Fennell.
Ah, hello.
Awesome and wonderful. And last and certainly not least, we have Miss Crystal Evans. She actually resides within the Baltimore community, and she is the Community Relations Manager at Johns Hopkins Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. Within this capacity, she has been forming partnerships with advocacy groups, community leaders, research participants, faculty, and staff to raise public awareness, trust, and engagement within the research process. Working inside the Baltimore region, she actually helps in honoring the legacy of Henrietta Lacks on the impact on the medicine, health equity, and research ethics. Hello, Miss Evans.
Hello, it's an honor to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, how's everyone doing? How's everyone feeling? Are we good?
Relieved.
Yeah.
TV, but thank you. It's an honor to be here, actually. Thanks for the invitation.
It's a blessing to have you all on. Now, we're going to ask this question because we got to set a basis where everyone is coming from in regards to your careers. So we asked this question, what inspired you to get into the career that you are into today? And we're actually going to start with Dr. Brady.
That's a very good question. I think a great place to start. My journey to being a basic cancer researcher started when I was in high school and made the decision to pursue a bachelor's degree in chemistry. And this was really a decision that I made based off of interactions with my fantastic AP chemistry teacher, Mrs. Matney. And otherwise I wouldn't have made that decision. I probably would have gone into sports medicine. And then I did a chemistry degree at Radford University in the southwest part of Virginia. And I also played Division I softball there. So most of my time was spent either in the library doing chemistry or doing chemistry homework or on the field. And so I didn't do very much research, but I had the opportunity to do 10 weeks at UNC Chapel Hill in pharmacology for a summer. And that's where I kind of caught the cancer research bug. I was in Channing Durr's lab for that 10 weeks. And that solidified my desire to pursue a PhD and go on to be an academic researcher. So without those opportunities, I would not have been able to do that. And I think one of the important parts of that is that I was in Channing's lab that summer, and he's one of the first people who identified that the RAS genes that are mutated 30% of the time in human cancer, that they actually weren't coming from a viral introduction of that mutation, but that they were actually mutations in our own genes. And we still are trying to fight what happened to these RAS oncogenes now. And so I think that it's kind of fitting that, I guess that was maybe 15 years ago now that I started that research, that we still kind of do that in my lab today.
That's outstanding. One, going from athlete to doing science. I love that. It's you can go into more detail. Dr. Fennell, with being across the pond, tell us about your story and inspiration to getting what you do today.
Yeah, so I think my main driver for focusing on cancer was seeing patients with cancer. I had an interest in pharmacology, in molecular biology from an early stage during a first degree in pharmacology based in London. And thinking about the sort of the development of novel drugs was always something that interested me. Seeing the cancer problem across all specializations as I was passing through internal medicine really got me focused, I think, on the challenge of how we can treat cancer. And so during my training, undertaking specialist training, PhD in experimental therapeutics, focusing actually predominantly on cell death and ways in which cancer cells evade cell death, defend themselves against apoptosis. This sort of kind of came together, really, my basic science interest and clinical interest in therapeutics, experimental therapeutics, and particularly clinical trials. So really for the last, I'd say 15 years or so, my interest is very, very much in relation to clinical trials. I have a particular focus on one cancer, one relatively rare cancer, but the principles which we apply obviously are universal to how we study new drugs in this disease.
That's outstanding in terms of your journey leading towards doing clinical trials. Now we have the research, we have medical doctor, but we also need the community organizer, being able to work in the Baltimore area. And it actually is interesting, all of us, I'm sure. Miss Evans, how did you get into this? I want to know.
Well, I was pushed out the womb as a community advocate and activist. And I only say that because I became a caregiver as a child. My father suffered a stroke when I was 9, and I served as his like liaison to the medical community, even at 9, and noticed that there was a difference in the way in which we were being treated as African Americans in a middle-class community in Baltimore versus our counterparts. I noticed that people would, refer to him by his first name. They would use a lot of medical jargon that none of us understood. And being that I was a young child caregiver, it was kind of like I felt dismissed. So I really had that fire in my back for caregivers at that point. And fast forward around when I finished my graduate studies, I have a master's in psychology from Loyola University in Baltimore and a minor in diversity and cultural competency. Again, that passion. I started working at Johns Hopkins in Alzheimer's research and noticed that there was this huge disparity. Alzheimer's disease is more prevalent in the African American community, as I'm sure most of you know, but in particular in Baltimore City. And I was a part of a center that was recruiting participants, and only 4% of their participants were African American. They were at risk of losing their funding. I did a walk around with the head of the department and said, what is the demographic of the patients here? And like only one was of African descent and not from the United States. And I said, until we address this health equity issue, you're not gonna improve accrual of participants. Fast forward to like 2009, the head of the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research heard about my outreach related to Alzheimer's and was like, who's this person? How could they get the participant number from 4% to 80% and get an NIA award? And so that's really how I ended up getting involved and getting familiar with the Henrietta Lacks story. I felt a special connection with the story and the health equity issues that are in the book. And through a colleague of mine, Barbara Bates Hopkins, and others, really got an opportunity to engage the greater Baltimore, Washington community in the story of Henrietta Lacks. So I've dedicated, I would say, honestly, you guys, I've dedicated half of my career cycle to being an advocate on health equity issues centered around Henrietta Lacks. I think of her as that, you have the Snickers bar and you have the nuts and the caramel. I think she's all of those great ingredients that get people interested in the segue of science, health equity, and patients' rights. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope I gave you the quick summary, Ralph.
Absolutely. And it's great that you brought up the story, because I think when we come to the story of Henrietta Lacks, who she is, what happened, there's a number of different things in terms of how it's being portrayed and being discussed within our respective circles, honestly. So the first question I want to pose to you all, we can actually start with Dr. Fennell on this one. How, in terms of being across the pond, how is Henrietta's story being received by those you have interacted with, and even in circles and in media and in general? Because for me, as a grad student and even growing up, I didn't start hearing about it until the 2010 release of the book. And even leading down that line, not a lot of textbooks would bring it up within my studies in chemistry or in biology. It's only until now I was like, wow, it's getting more and more active. And so with Dr. Fennell, I'm very interested to see what's happening across in the UK in terms of her story.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, actually, that there have been sort of documentaries and a lot of attention paid in the media over the last number of years, perhaps not as much as I'd like to see. The month of October is Black History Month, and there's an opportunity in the media to focus on pillars of Black history. And it's something that's yet to be done, I think, to really give Henrietta Lacks a big enough platform, actually, to really describe the importance of her contribution to cancer research, to viral oncology, all sorts of areas of research, and of course the ethical complexity to that story, actually, and how it's impacted our need to use informed consent, that sort of thing. So I'd like to see more. I think the fact that we're hearing globally so much, particularly in this year of COVID, about Black Lives Matter, about the I guess the inequities actually in all sorts of walks of life. This is a clear, stark example of that, and it's important to celebrate, I think, the benefit to human beings that this lady has brought. I just want to add one thing, actually. I do remember very clearly the first encounter I had with Hilar as a student was with the name Helen Lane, not Henrietta Lacks. I remember distinctly, actually, a number of years later, that changing, thinking, gosh, who's this Henrietta Lacks? But quite some time into my undergraduate and even postgraduate career, it wasn't very clear, about this history. And yeah, there needs to be as much attention, I think, to this history as possible, I think, especially for new students of science coming up from school and beyond.
It's so interesting, and even receiving the cells in terms of the side name of Helen Lane, that's mind-boggling, and thinking about who could receive these cells during a time. Miss Evans, you have a particular connection in terms of Baltimore, and so we'll go to you in regards to how's it received in your circles in discussing Henrietta Lacks and in the media and your work.
Well, I agree with everyone. I don't know about you guys, but being an 80s baby, I never heard about Henrietta Lacks. I don't recall reading anything about her in the textbooks. I learned about her when the book came out and when our institute started rolling out their press junkets. Each year we hold a conference where we honor her legacy and address diversity, ethics, and patients' rights. In our community, this story, we all feel like we're a part of Henrietta Lacks's family, including, it's like a tapestry in this community. It brings the different generations together. We've actually at Hopkins, through the outreach I've done, taken the story in different components. So one is to focus on getting students, high school students, interested in STEM careers. So what we do each year is we invite students to come in and do a tour. We also have a scholarship through Dunbar High School in Baltimore that provides $40,000 to a student, a scholar, to pursue their careers. We also have a book club that actually ran throughout Greater Baltimore and started in Turner Station, where we actually worked with some of the people who are in the book, Miss Speed in particular, people who knew Henrietta and her family, to get the community to talk about this subject matter. And what we noticed again was that people had different interests. Some people were interested in the health equity issue, how could you the social justice issues around racism and discrimination, both historically and the current context. Others were concerned about the ethics and how were the cells being utilized. But then there are also other non-African American communities who jumped on board as well, who were very concerned about the science and the cells themselves. So we have this connection, and I call it the town, gown, ground connection, because in addition to really mobilizing our local residents and our communities, we also have mobilized educators. We've mobilized key decision makers within the greater Baltimore region right around health equity and Henrietta Lacks. And it's actually her 100th birthday just passed. So the family is dedicating a whole year to celebrating, and we as Hopkins have jumped on that bandwagon as well.
That's astounding to hear. To all of our panelists and attendees, I'm actually going to be dropping the link in regards to the Lacks lecture that's coming up for Johns Hopkins in honor of Henrietta Lacks. Now, we have what's happening across the pond. We have known in terms of what's going on in Baltimore. Dr. Brady, in regards to research and even your own personal circle regarding with research investigators, how's it going in terms of discussing the story of Henrietta Lacks?
That's a great question. I think we sometimes, I'd love to tell my first interaction with this cell line as well. That was as a graduate student. And I utilized this cell line to discover how a certain protein influenced cell cycle progression and how the powerhouses of our cells, mitochondria, were split into cells as they divided. And at the time, I didn't know the origin story behind the cell line, right? So this was early, I guess, early 2000s. And then once I graduated from Carolina in 2008, right? So this is right before the book came out. And we continued to do some of this research when I was in my postdoc at Duke University and utilized that cell line more to kind of understand the determinants of cell cycle progression and how that was regulated. And I can remember now thinking back to, I think there's a certain reverence that when you use the cell line and respect that comes with utilizing it to do your own research. At the University of Pennsylvania, there's actually a current initiative that's ongoing where people will need to, that is trying to get off the ground, where people will have to submit permission to even utilize the cell lines for, not even for the genetic information where there has to be approval, but also just to use them in their own labs for doing the research that I'm talking about now. Because I think people understand the sensitivity and the ethical reasons that need to be in place. And so I think that it's critically important for us to have these discussions and think about how we want to move forward as a research community, because as we continue down the line and we try to get more information from diverse research samples, then how is that information going to be protected? And so I think that we need to think about this in the age of sequencing and everything for basic researchers, how we're going to do that.
It's amazing to hear all three of you in terms of responding, in terms of initiating ethical discussions, to getting involved in the community and spreading the word. But also, I didn't even know that universities were actually asking for permission. Like, you have to ask permission to use cells down the line, which it actually leads to a follow-up question that I was thinking about, because, with being Henrietta Lax's birth year in terms of being born in August, a lot of articles came out and asking people's comments in regards to how should we treat the cells themselves. On one side, we have people saying that there should be a reduction of the use of the cells in general. And then other news came about that the Lax family put out, or some other universities put out, that maybe we should move forward the cancer research and still honor the use of the cell. And I wonder, what is everyone's thought in terms of response towards either side, honestly? And we can maybe start with you, Dr. Brady, because it seems like you're about reverence and giving honor to her and making sure that give justice.
Yeah, I mean, at least that's my personal approach to utilizing it. I mean, I think that they have been used to do so many special things in the scientific enterprise. There are discoveries that would not be possible without them, and you highlighted those at the beginning of this discussion. And I think that there is potential in continuing to use them, but the way in which you use them, I think we should all be mindful that that was someone else's gift to research, not in this case because it wasn't known, but I think even moving forward, that's something making a conscious decision to allow us to allow them to even be part of the research process. And so for me, I would say that I think that there's probably a middle ground where there's the reverence for utilizing the cell lines and maybe some permission for what you really want to use them for within each university system. And I think that that's kind of what the petitions that are ongoing at the University of Pennsylvania are aiming to do, and I support that.
Dr. Fennell, how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, certainly these cell lines occupy such a unique role in the history of sort of cancer biology that they quite happily, for me, actually deserve to have that particular place where the cell line might require consent or to be used. if through some third-party custodian, for example. The cell's been used a huge amount, obviously, over the last number of decades. And I read somewhere that, in the order of 50 million metric tons or something of cells have been generated, over the years since they were created. So these cells are used very, very widely, and the practical issue of actually gaining consent for a cell line, I think, would be very challenging, just from a pragmatic standpoint. I mean, the impact this sort of history has had, I think, has been to influence how we do cancer research today. I mean, most of the cell lines I work with are generated from my own patients, actually, but we use informed consent. We have a very structured process called Good Clinical Practice, or GCP, which is an international protocol standard for how we do research. And I think the time is very different now in the security around information and anonymization and all of that. And there are legal sanctions. If something's done inappropriately, rules are broken, and there are audit trails to show that, then there are penalties for institutions, not just individual researchers. So I think we're in a better place now than we have been. But just to answer that question, I think this is it would be fitting, I think, for Henrietta Lacks's memory that if it were a consensus to get consent to use those lines, that'd be done, because this really started the whole ball rolling, I think, with the cancer cell lines and immortalization.
Absolutely. Miss Evans, would you think?
I think that we're in this perfect storm right now with COVID-19, Black Lives Matter movement, all the things that have happened this year, that there is a huge need to continue research utilizing the Henrietta Lacks. So with that said, I understand. I mean, come on, I live in Baltimore. So we have a special relationship with the research community, which I think most areas have, but we just happen to live in the backyard of our research institution. So we can literally see our research institution from our windows, and we have concerns about research in general. I think we need to really address the trust issue when it comes to research. And that's one of the things I think I hear when we have this divergent view of do more research this year, moving forward related to the Henrietta Lacks cells, or hey, cut down. I think that more so means be more mindful and conservative and thoughtful about how you're utilizing the cells, as our other panelists have mentioned. And I know at Hopkins, one approach that we've taken is we've established a community research advisory council. Ironically enough, the group was established around 2009, right before the book came out. And our whole goal in establishing this board is to have a group of people who review research studies, especially ones related to very sensitive topics like the utilization of Henrietta Lacks cells, and give the feedback. We're not an institutional review board. We can't say yes or no whether a study occurs or not, but we do have some level of sanction to give you that feedback from both the patient, the healthcare professional, and the various providers that can help influence how the utilization of the cells are conducted. And also, more importantly, how do we get those research findings out? Like, how do we get people to learn about the research that Dr. Brady and Dr. Fennell have been conducting, which I'm sure could help improve my quality of life? Why is it that all of the research that has been done on Henrietta Lacks using her cells is, published in all these big journals, but, I can't find out about it on YouTube or Twitter, or Facebook. And I really need that information as well. So I think that we need to include the community in these decisions as well, or at least our voices need to be heard more. And I know at Hopkins and other institutions, her cells are being used for COVID research. In fact, at our conference coming up, we talk a little bit about how her cells are being used to understand how COVID invades the body. So it's a very salient topic, and I think we need to have these conversations.
Most definitely. And it's interesting taking all what you have said in, because as I think about what is doing now in terms of I think most people's quick reaction was, well, we need to pay the Lax family as quick as possible. And even now within this year, actually a British company, Abcam, made one of the major donations this year to the Lax family through the Henrietta Lacks Foundation to support others in pursuing their scientific endeavors for career. And then other labs, and now with Dr. Brady telling me labs are getting permission to make sure to give reverence, there are others that are donating money. And it's so astounding that it took this long, but it's also astounding of where we can go from here. In terms of the next question, this will actually be posed to Dr. Brady and Dr. Fennell. You know, when it comes to the overarching issue, when it came to taking samples from Henrietta Lacks, there's a sense of where is the patient confidentiality, and especially when it comes to research, you know, there's enough PDXs and tumor samples that we've used throughout our research in terms of making sure that patients are remaining confidential. So I guess I asked, what are some of the challenges that we have had to overcome to make sure that that's maintained? And I'll start with Dr. Fennell in terms of the patients, and then we'll go to Dr. Brady in terms of the research that's going on.
Well, we have, quite complex systems now to ensure, confidentiality, to ensure that the donation of material is given under very controlled circumstances, sometimes requiring 24 hours of consideration of the protocol through the informed consent procedure before anything happens. As I say, a good proportion of our research today, particularly involving genomic research in cancer, requires these consent processes to occur. Now we're legislated essentially to ensure that this happens. I think that I would be quite confident in saying that research now, by and large, is a process in which patients can feel secure or should feel secure. Where there is a failure of that security, then that needs to be called out, and of course there are, to say, penalties for that, not just for individuals but for institutions. So we're in a much better place than was the case back then. I think in the 50s, we, I guess, make progress in all sorts of ways, don't we? Moving forward, sometimes much slower than we'd like to see, but I would say we're in a better place now in terms of the integrity of the scientific process, and safety of patient confidentiality.
Absolutely. Dr. Brady, in regards to research, what can you speak to in terms of the confidentiality, making sure the tumors that we use or any type of cell line or anything has been kept safe in terms of the information there?
Absolutely. This is such an important question. My lab even collaborates with clinicians who get IRB approval to isolate cancer cell lines and create those, make PDXs and these types of things. And it's important for the scientific enterprise and to be able to, take something from a patient, do experiments, and then maybe inform the treatment that's going to happen for that patient. We need to kind of have that pipeline. But in order to have that pipeline work successfully for everyone, that information does need to be de-identified. And so in terms of my research in that realm, most of everything that we get has no information at all, other than the origin of the sample, meaning the tissue of origin, and maybe some of the genetic information in terms of mutation status, expression status, things like this. So we don't have any of that information when we go on to do the research, which I think is really, really important. But I do think we need to keep in mind the samples that we are utilizing for our research as we think about the disparities that persist, right? For the most part, the samples that we utilize, unless it's these HeLa cells, are not from a diverse background of people. And so we need to break down these barriers in terms of getting informed consent and going into our communities. At the University of Pennsylvania, much like Hopkins, it sits within West Philadelphia, where most of the population looks like those of us that are on this call today. But that's not necessarily the samples that we're utilizing in our labs. And so we do need to have that type of information such that when I make discoveries, that it's not just for a certain percent of the population where that particular therapeutic may work, and it's not going to work in the case of, let's say a Black woman with breast cancer, where the percentages of patients that succumb to that disease are so much higher for our Black women. And so I think that it's important that we continue to try to break down those barriers to giving these samples, and doing that by telling patients what information is going to be utilized, and that they have the right to get the information that the physicians and scientists are obtaining during those studies, especially if they're not blinded studies.
Absolutely. With a theme that seems to come to point, at least in this one, the legislature that Dr. Fennell brought up has been set in stone and has been kept over in the States. I know we have IRBs and, keeping the barcodes like very particular, making sure we know that information in terms of genetic as well as just biological, what happened within the disease for the patient, but nothing else in terms of information. But this comes to a head when it comes to building trust, right? When it comes to trusting in regards to the community and the doctors. And Ms. Evans, I think you can speak well to this in terms of the building of the trust in the Baltimore community to what doctors are doing and proposing clinical trials and everything. Could you elaborate a little bit?
Well, trust is something that must be maintained and can be broken in like 2 seconds. Think about your relationships. I think in this day and age, one of the things at Hopkins, we work really closely with our Office of Diversity, Cultural Competency, and Health Equity to do initiatives. So, for example, our physicians established and rolled around the Black Lives Matter to Black Doctors Matter, to really speak in unity around the issues of social justice and health equity. What we also do is we have physicians come out into the community to share their research findings and to encourage individuals to become more involved in the scientific process, but not just as research participants, but in the development of research questions and how to share the findings, just so we don't feel like we're always on the table, always viewed as a subject, which is okay. We, as Dr. Brady mentioned and Dr. Fennell, we need to increase the diversity and research participants, but we also need to increase workforce diversity and the opportunities for community stakeholders to be involved in a meaningful way. So that's really what we're doing as a university-wide, is to create a pipeline for more diverse individuals to be involved in the healthcare workforce and in the research enterprise environment in diverse ways.
Awesome. Now, I'm here to let you know in terms of the attendees we have students, we of course have people that are not familiar in terms of science, but one thing that we can all agree on in terms of this is bioethics. So the question I have for all three of you, and we can actually keep going in terms of Dr. Fennell, Dr. Brady, and Ms. Evans, what is your advice to anyone? It can be doctor, investigator, parent, loved one, in regards to improving the bioethics that we hold currently and improving upon them when it comes to being involved in cancer research. So Dr. Fennell.
Gosh, I think that, when we have our informed consent process, which is absolutely pivotal to all translational research, I very often use the term translational research to relate to anything that derives primarily from a patient who's in front of you, who may be in a clinical trial or in whom you want to maybe test drugs on their tissue, that sort of thing. Now, the informed consent process we actually have reviewed through a national process. That was for streamlining, so that all applications across the UK would converge through this central review process. The key thing for a patient or family, it has to be that opportunity to review and discuss the informed consent, to have enough time to do that. The sort of the worst example, I think, of taking consent is where the paper's put in front of the family and the family are given minutes to listen to a brief description of the project, and then are encouraged to take the pen and sign. I'm just using that as a hypothetical, but that would be a terrible example of how to do consent. So, allowing the patient in my sort of practice setting with a family member who perhaps, will be able to listen and discuss afterwards, after the consultation, the sort of ins and outs of the project, have time to think and meditate on that, and then come back and ask questions about it. That's the ideal sort of setting where you can feel satisfied as a patient and family that the project, the research is fully understood and the implications of that, both good and possible risks, are fully discussed. So I think that that's again encompassed within the ICH-GCP framework, the sort of the approach that we use now in approaching clinical research and protecting data, in ensuring that there's an ethical committee overseeing the projects and so on. And I feel comfortable today in being able to give my patients that sort of, or allow those patients to have a sense of trust in what we do.
It's astonishing just to think about that you're bringing families in just to discuss it in general, because I know in terms of times like these, some people might want to keep very individual, just between you and me. And the fact that you bring mom, father, sister, brother in just to discuss the hypersensitivity that goes towards this information is just vital to me. And I feel like more hospitals could adopt that in some way to continue in that way.
If I may say just very briefly, it's because of the context, I think. Perhaps my context can be slightly different from Dr. Brady in that very often we're taking the material from our own patients in the practice. And very often we're having complex conversations about drugs, about what we're going to do to treat those patients. But it's in handling the tissue that we also have to ensure that patients understand. And very often, particularly if they're elderly individuals, having a younger, sort of web-savvy family member available to listen to what's being said, maybe pick up on things that the patient hasn't picked up on, and then discuss that with the patient, grandson, granddaughter, maybe when they go home, is incredibly important, I think, sometimes.
Absolutely. Dr. Brady?
In terms of the bioethics, right? So how we discuss that in research laboratories and things like that, I think we don't do it as much as we probably should. And I think I would pose the question that, or the thought that, just because something can be done doesn't mean that it should be done. And maybe we should be thinking about our research in that way. And I really love Crystal's point that maybe if we go to our communities and ask them, what are the things that they want to know, right? What is the thing that's keeping them up at night about their health? Maybe we'll find better research questions. Maybe we'll be able to make a larger impact instead of staying within our bubbles of science to do things. I don't know, that's just one thing that I'm thinking about as we have this discussion and we think about the ethics of all the research questions that we do every single day. How do we make better connections to the community so that we can do that? I think that that's a critical piece that in so many places is missing.
Absolutely. Ms. Evans, in regards to bioethics, I know probably as you collaborate with your committee in regards to going into community, there's always going to have to be a baseline knowledge in regards to what is going to occur within that community with your doctors. Could you give more insight into how meetings go? Because I think you discussed the story in terms of going out into community, and a lot of people don't understand disease progression, but they also don't understand what the doctor is actually doing once you get into the room. So what is in place there in particular?
Well, first off, we think knowledge is power. And we work really hard at equipping community members with the understanding of what the Institutional Review Board is, what informed consent means. We actually have had pre-COVID tours of our IRB offices, and people have had opportunities to sit in. Of course, they're listeners or lurkers to observe how research studies are being reviewed for ethics and safety. And we've noticed that helps equip people to be able to make more informed decisions. And what I want to do is say, Ralph, by providing that information to a subset of people, then they go out into the community and teach. And then they also, what I think is most effective is to partner, have the physician or the health clinician go out to the community with someone who is a patient, who has been directly impacted by their health topic. And then that's really how you get people more interested in being involved in the research process. I know personally, because again, I've been at Hopkins for a bit of a time. Before I started working in the ICTR, I worked really closely with State Senator Verna Jones and other individuals impacted by Alzheimer's who were key decision makers. And what we did was bring out physicians to talk about the disease process and also bring out patients to share how they've been impacted. And that's ultimately how people started saying, well, whoa, wait a minute. I want to join a study. I want to find out more about effective ways to treat my health issue. We also have that same model going through our cancer disparities research centers. So I think it's really forming a partnership within our institutions. Just as much as we want to do that external community and patient engagement, we need to do it in-house. I think what you're doing, Ralph, and what your the Black and Cancer movement is doing is awesome. I mean, you gave me a chance to be on a panel with these medical influencers and not feel like I'm the little I. And I think we need to do that more. Think outside the box and bring diverse people to the table. Now, the questions that I might ask might be totally different than Dr. Brady and Dr. Fennell based upon my life experiences or my educational level, but there is some validity to all of our perspectives. And I think that's really what we need to be doing. I hope I answered your question, Ralph. Let me know.
All of you actually have answered a lot of questions. We have questions in regards to taking part. How can we encourage more Black people to get in clinical trials? I think we made the notion in terms of knowledge is power, period. I think we all need to know that. In regard, we actually have a question, and actually anyone can take this question. How do we get the story of Henrietta Lacks out there to every young Black child? I think that's entirely important in regards to just bringing the next generation up to knowing what has occurred thus far. So while we grow and do what we do, we already have a set basis to the next people to bring along Black and Cancer and what it entails with Henrietta Lacks. Anyone can take this one.
Well, again, I'm going back to our book club. What we did was we partnered with community leaders who were actually like heads of Girl Scouts, who were teachers in elementary schools and middle schools, and really shared that story with the students. And you make it really personal, and students really became involved and engaged and bring their parents involved in as well. I think that the story, the Henrietta Lacks story, is relatable to everyone. You just have to really meet people where they are. But you're right, it's a challenge. We don't want it to be like one generation really is knowledgeable about this history, and then we needed to connect across generations. But I think for me, as a community liaison and advocate, that would be my strategy. And I'm sure that Dr. Brady and Dr. Fennell have different approaches, but that's what I would be doing.
Dr. Brady or Dr. Fennell, what would be your strategy since we're bringing it up now?
After you, Dr. Brady.
I really like Mrs. Evans' idea here, which is I think we need to give people the knowledge of that information. And maybe one way to do that is through these book clubs. I could see that there could be the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. It's right there behind her. Why don't we create something that is a children's book that continues to sell that story, right? And tells us the history of her family, that tells us the amazing discoveries that have been made, and the potential of science and research, right? I mean, I think I don't know, there could be something to doing that, to getting that information out.
And when I think about it, I'm sorry to cut in.
No, please.
Dr. Brady, but one of my colleagues, they're like cleaning up the press junkets for our upcoming lecture. And I was reading something about Dr. Roland Patillo. And, I'm one of those people that's really a stickler for history, and in particular Black history in medicine. And I was reading it and I said, well, wait a minute. Dr. Patillo was the only African-American who worked with George Guy. That's where his interest in the science became key. And that's really the story that we use when we go out and talk to elementary schools, middle school students, high school, college, anyone that's anyone, when they hear of Dr. Roland Patillo, and that he would, especially when you're talking about 1950, oh my gosh, that story alone, those one or two sentences really can get people fired up and ready to go to be involved in the science. And so I think it's even looking at the story and taking the pieces that people can relate to. Like someone might be interested in Deborah and looking for answers and what was my mother like? And, what was, how was research conducted? I remember a question in the book where she said, was my mother feeling cold when the cells were in the refrigerator? So those type of things connect with people. But then there are other people who've come to our lecture that usually had about 8,000 people, but now we're doing virtual. So let's see how that turns out. I remember people coming from, like, say, Iowa or rural Pennsylvania who would come up to me and say, I just want to learn more about the cells. How did they multiply? How does that impact health? So I think if we go back to our respective communities, identify what the tipping points are for that particular community and take one nugget and wrap it around our own lives and what we're doing, we could really make a difference. But it doesn't necessarily mean taking the whole book. Just like the Dr. Patillo story that I mentioned, it's on page 49. It's 2 sentences, but those 2 sentences, I don't know about you guys, but hello, an African-American coming from Morehouse, working with the HeLa cell in 1950, and what I've heard from my parents about 1950, I'm thinking, wow, kudos. That's just I
love that.
The day.
So, I mean, for me, this is a story of global significance in the second half of the 20th century, and all the developments in biomedicine, pivot really on this lady, actually. And with an increasing awareness that there's an unwritten Black history that needs to be told. I mean, my kind of feeling is that there should be core curriculum for, I don't know what grade you would call it in the US, but for certainly primary school children, so that they're made aware of the importance of this discovery and the lady behind it, but also the ethical dimension as well. The fact that we have an example here of where, because of racial disparity, I think it's fair to say this was possible, and this is no longer possible. And to give that sort of sense of how we do ethical, how we think ethically today would be fantastic. But core curriculum would be my suggestion.
Absolutely. Now, in regards to, and this will be the last question, and then, the time has been well spent. I enjoyed having this conversation with all of you. When it comes to your particular careers, and I guess careers out in general, what's going now, what do you think the future holds for us when we have to put questions of ethics, questions of what occurred with Henrietta Lacks, and how we build upon it for everyone at this point? Because for me, as an investigator, I'm always going to be concerned of the next step that's going to come out of this. Because I envision more Black people going into clinical trials, more basis in terms of the research that we do, and more community members coming in and encouraging us to be, hey, let me be a part of this. What do you think the future holds for all of us in this sense? And I love going with Dr. Fennell, but let's start with Dr. Brady.
Sure. I think it means connection. I think it means breaking down the walls that may be between the research community, the medical community, and everyone at large. And that's what I would hope for our future, in terms of being able to discuss things honestly about how research is conducted that can empower people's lives when they're dealing with cancer.
Dr. Fennell.
Gosh, well, I think for all Black people to know that a fellow Black individual had basically kick-started modern cancer biology, I think is a wonderful thing to have that understanding of. That's not perhaps known sufficiently widely. And to know that, you know, the sort of injustices of what happened back in the 50s, you know, cannot happen again. That there need to be rules, legislation in place that Black people can feel will give them the opportunity to participate, to help advance science, advance medicine, but having that trust in the people that are doing that work.
Miss Evans.
I've just been listening to our illustrious panel, and I'm going to sum up what everyone said right now as the 3 C's. Connection, cultural relevance, because like as Dr. Fennell's mentioning, like we, you know, the idea that the cells, you know, impact of a Black woman impacted medicine is really crucial. They also staying relevant today. And then I think we need communication and collaboration, especially in this digital world that we're in today. It's like we, Dr. Brady, have an opportunity to break down those silos that you were talking about that keep us as academic community from the local residents and others through Twitter, Facebook, Zoom, telephones, which are old-fashioned, I guess, these days, but figure out a way to really make these connections and develop information that is user-friendly. When I think about the informed consents that Dr. Fennell talked about, gosh, what are they, like 30 pages? And what's the literacy level? They always say 12th grade, Dr. Fennell, Dr. Brady, but I think it's like grad school. I think I can't understand it. And I don't know about you, Ralph, or you, Dr. Henderson, but it's really complicated. And I think we need to speak a common language, make it, you know, more uniform and united. And I think that, as you guys have mentioned, through connections, cultural competency, communications and collaborations, we can make this happen. So I think that, Ralph, you guys need to help a think tank to keep this moving so we can be the change.
I will say on behalf of Black in Cancer, we got so many tanks rolling. We would be honored to do this because this is well needed. Any parting words? Where can everyone find you all, whether it's on Twitter, whether it is on maybe Facebook pages or Instagram, or even just emails? Where can we all find you if we want to continue the discussion? Any one of you can throw it out.
LinkedIn's pretty good.
On Twitter, we're Brady Lab UPenn.
Miss Evans.
Gosh, I'm the one that you can't find on any of those things. It's just like my good old personal life. So I'll just put my email address out there. I don't think you guys want to know see all of my pictures of my cat and my dog. I am totally playing. If you go to the ICTR website, you can find me. Johns Hopkins.
And I believe you all have chat privileges, so you can drop those if you need to. Go right ahead. Some people are saying they want to see your pet, so I don't know what to tell you. This has definitely been uplifting, I think, and this is going to be an ongoing conversation for years to come, I believe. I still have the book to myself. I don't put it in anything, but it's always with me. I've read it so many times, but it's a wonderful thing. All of you, Dr. Brady, Dr. Fennell, and Miss Evans, thank you for coming to this panel as we close out Black in Cancer Week in terms of the knowledge we have gained. I hope you enjoyed it. This is going to keep going. Always come for us, and please stay on. We actually have a link that we want to come and just thank you all. To all of our attendees, thank you for joining us. This has been a wonderful time. I hope you loved it, and join us next year. Who knows? We might, you know.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.